They sincerely believe that they are losing the war, not because Ukrainians are fighting, but because the West is helping. I have to add that we are going to have Third World War. You could argue that it's already started. We could argue that it started on 24th of February 22. There are some people who think that we are still, in a 1937 period, that the war is not started yet, but unfortunately Russia is preparing for it, and the last changes within the government also indicate that Russia is, considering the possibility that this war will become, real, and that it would escalate, and the theater of military activity will be widened, and it would go outside the Ukrainian territory. They just conducted some tactical nuclear weapons exercises with Belarus. They moved some time ago. They moved nuclear weapons to Belarus. What I think is a great danger. On a rhetorical question, you could not actually imagine how crazy Russians are. They are threatening the world with preventive nuclear strikes against Eastern Europe, against Central Europe. A couple of days ago, the deputy of foreign minister actually said that Americans will pay for the decision to allow Ukrainians to use their weapons. I mean, they are ready to fight against this in the whole world. And unfortunately, they are supported by China. We have to add this. This is important help, which came to Russia, and they're dumping dollars now together with China and India. They're buying gold. The indication is that they're preparing for the full-scale war, and I think that I hope this would never happen. But in order to prevent this, and this is the only option, we have to help Ukraine to win this war, while this war is only a Russian-Ukrainian war. Because from the point of view of the West, this is still a Russian-Ukrainian war. From the point of view of Russia, they are fighting against NATO in Ukraine. So the only way to avoid the full-scale Third World War is to defeat Russia in Ukraine. But for this, we need to have to abolish all limitations which we had for this like two more years, specifically giving Ukraine the long-range weaponry, which is able to reach Moscow. Because again, Russia is a city of Russia is a country of one city. It's difficult to imagine for Europeans, where you usually have many cities in each country, but this is not so for Russia. Whatever happens in Moscow is important. We remember what happened in Moscow when Prigozhin stated in June of last year that he is going to take Moscow. There was a huge panic, and Moscow kind of, capitulated even before Prigozhin reached it. But Moscow is important, so we have to give Ukrainians permission to strike against Moscow. We have to give Ukrainians weapons to strike against Moscow. And once again, this is the only chance to stop the war. Otherwise, this would escalate.
How credibly should we take the threat of Putin, for example, using tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine or in other parts of Eastern Europe? That has been one of the reasons the Americans and others have been reluctant until now to provide certain weapons to Ukraine. Should we take those warnings from the Kremlin at face value, or is it a bluff?
Well, partially this is a bluff, but the bluff is that Russia would use nuclear weapons. Russia will not use nuclear weapons, but here's a trick. Russia moved nuclear weapons to Belarus. So I think what Putin would do, and that's how he usually behaved himself. He would strike from Belarus, not from Russia. So the retaliation will be against Belarus and not against the Russian Federation. And I think this is the plan. I do not think this is necessarily going to happen this way. Probably not. I do not think, for example, that they will strike against Ukraine. I do not think so, because they sincerely believe that they will take Ukraine without nuclear weapons or without nuclear options if they would stop foreign help to Ukraine. That's why it's very important for them to stop this help, because they sincerely believe that they are losing the war, not because the Ukrainians are fighting, but because the West is helping. So this is the idea, and the idea of to use nuclear weapons is also connected to the idea to stop the assistance to Ukraine. So let's strike against Poland or Lithuania, so the West would see that we are, ready to use nuclear weapons, and this would frighten them, and they would stop the war, help to Ukraine. This is the idea, but I think it's not going to be done by Russia formally. I think they would do it from Belarus, and that's why I think it's very important, not only to think about defending Ukraine, but also about thinking about changing regime in Belarus, because Lukashenko is extremely unpopular there. We know this. He lost elections. The Belarusians are against him, and the change of regime in Belarus is also a necessity, because Russia is using this territory for advance against Europe. That's how the war against Ukraine started in February of 22. They were trying to reach Kiev, advancing from Belarus, and they also would use Belarus, of course, if they plan any ground operation against Eastern Europe, first of all, Poland and the Baltic states. So Belarus is very important strategic territory, and I think at one point, I do not know when, but at one point the West would have to deal with this problem as well.
Could his position be undermined very quickly, though? I mean, if, for instance, Ukraine was allowed to strike targets in, for example, Moscow, deeper into mainland Russia, could you then see internal opposition to Putin rear its head? I mean, the nature with all these dictators is that, if they're going to rule by terror, they've got to rule by absolute terror. The moment their authority starts to appear shaky, it can go downhill very quickly.
I think the answer is yes, although I do not want to say that it's very simple and it's not going to be very quick. But again, we know from history that the attempt to kill Hitler, was the result of Germany not being able to conduct the war the way German army was expecting, right, in 1944, sorry. So there are some people who are able to deal with Putin, meaning the FSB, for example. But in order to do this, they have to have a good reason to do this. And if they would have a good reason to do this, they would do it in order to survive. But we even need to help them, right? Because so far, everything was normal for them. Again, Russia didn't feel this war at all. After these recent statements, and again, the statements came from approximately the same time from the United States, from France, from Germany. Actually, if you see what's happening now in Russia, they're in a stage of panic. I mean, because now they know that they're going to lose this war. They were holding they were winning this war slowly, but they were winning this war for 2.5 years, well, slightly less. But now they know that they are going to lose. That's why they started, to threaten the world with nuclear strikes, and it's happening, from all levels of the Russian governments. You have dozens of publications of the Russian officials claiming that, well, now we will have to use nuclear weapons. Now we will destroy you because you crossed the red line. Yes, we crossed the red line because for the first time in two and a half almost years of war, right? We changed the strategy, and now it's a strategy to win the war. Except, prior to this, it was a strategy that Russia is not losing and Ukraine is not winning.
That is fascinating. So just to finish off by almost going back to where we started, you really do think, Yuri, that what we saw last week, that change in position, in particular from the Americans over US weapons being used by Ukraine against Russia inside Russia, you think that could be a game-changing moment in this war?
100%. Except that we have to continue to help Ukraine, because we do remember that for 5 months the American help, for example, to Ukraine was frozen, and this was a major deal for Ukraine. That's why we have all these problems around Kharkov now. Yes, we have to continue to help Ukraine with weapons, with long-range weapons. We have to take down all limitations, including the limitation, if it still exists, I do not know, to strike against Moscow.
Thank you for watching Frontline for Times Radio. For more, click subscribe on our YouTube channel. You can listen to Times Radio, and you can read more about the war in Ukraine and global security with your Times digital subscription.